You know, I like to have a lot of fun with this first name, so let me have this one right here, because ladies and gentlemen, my name is Lego Rocks, and I am the advocate for the reigning, defending, undisputed Universal Heavyweight Champion, Brock Nelson! Okay, yeah, we're not talking about Brock Lesnar. We're not even talking about Brock Besser. You know how many times we've made the reigning, defending, undisputed World Heavyweight Champion of the World thing to introduce Brock Besser in videos? Yeah, it was a much bigger deal back in 2017 when he was brand new in the league. But today, we are heading over to yet another Brock, because today we're going over to an article published on rg.org by, who was the writer here? Jim Behringer. That's exactly who it was, because he published this piece last week about the Vancouver Canucks and how they were interested in a very particular New York Islanders forward, Brock Nelson. Now, before we even dive into the article, we talk about what happened in the past, we talk about what could happen in the future. Let's talk about Brock Nelson, because I know a lot of y'all Vancouver fans would be tuning into this video saying, okay, wait a minute, what the hell, why this dude? Brock Nelson, I feel, for most Canucks fans, and I say just Canucks fans because many Canucks fans don't really pay attention to the Islanders. That's not a shot at anybody, it's just kind of what I've seen as a person who lives in Vancouver and who talks to Canucks fans quite frequently. I think that Brock Nelson in the Islanders system is just a guy. Like, he isn't really anybody who stands out in the most extreme way. I think people think of Brock Nelson in the same way they think of Nino Niederreiter in Winnipeg, or Ricard Raquel in Pittsburgh, or Travis Zajac when he was with the New Jersey Devils. Just kinda guys. Not necessarily bad players, but guys that don't really stand out much in the Vancouver market. When we think about the Islanders, we think about Noah Dobson because he was drafted in 2018 alongside of Quinn Hughes. We think about Bo Horvat because he was a former Vancouver Canuck. When it comes to New Jersey, we think of guys like Jack Hughes, Luke Hughes, for very obvious reasons. When it comes to Winnipeg, we think of guys like Connor Hellebuck because he and Thatcher Demko were both in the Vezina conversation last year. There are very easy ties that you can make with NHL players to Vancouver, but Brock Nelson doesn't really have any of that. He's 33 years old, 6'4", 212, left-handed guy, signed on to the end of this season making $6 million a year, so he is in the last season of his contract, and he is a big left-handed center. But the thing I don't think a lot of Canucks fans would realize is the fact that Brock Nelson has actually been a really strong hockey player the past few years. He has had 30-goal seasons the past 3 seasons straight, including a 75-point campaign in 2022-2023. He also had 69 points last year, very nice, and this season he is on pace for about 50 points. Now, unfortunately for Nelson, his point production is in a worse spot than it has been in prior years. I don't really think that's his fault. I think that's much to do with the New York Islanders being the New York Islanders. Everybody's calling for Lou Lamoriello's head over there. He's on pace for 29 goals, which would be a little bit of a step down from the consistent 34-plus goal seasons he has had. But ultimately, I think there's more benefit of the doubt to give to Brock Nelson, considering the fact that he was drafted by the Islanders all the way back in 2010. He is still with the organization. 33 isn't, like, too old. He's certainly still effective, and he was chosen for Team USA at the Four Nations Face-Off, too. So there's a lot of value that Brock Nelson brings as one of the top goal scorers on the New York Islanders right now. He is tied with Kyle Palmieri and behind Anders Lee for first on the team in goals, so obviously Brock Nelson has some stuff going for him. This is where we turn over to the article published on rg.org. The Canucks tried to acquire him last year. Let's go out there and read this. The Islanders are on the outside looking in for a wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference. Even after Patrick Waugh's coaching change last season, the team still continues to show that they can't hold leads in the third period, and they don't have the offense to stay afloat in the Eastern Conference. The Islanders are one of the older cores in the NHL and are very much in their win-now mode with the way the roster is constructed. Outside of top prospect Oliver Wahlstrom, there isn't much in the organization in terms of reinforcements coming in the future. So, what gives? ResponsibleGambling.org spoke to a trusted source on the topic that indicated change is indeed coming on Long Island this season if things don't turn around, and it may begin right at the top. The article talks then about Lou Lamoriello and whether or not his time is ticking with the Islanders, how making the playoffs in prior years actually extended his lifespan with that team, and then it talks about how the Isles could be sellers. But that will only happen if they feel the team is really out of it, the source told RG. Lou Lamoriello wants to see what happens when everyone is back healthy and in the lineup. The Islanders are dealing with injuries to key players like Barzal, Duclair, Parekh, and Riley. However, even with these players in the lineup, they were still not winning games. This is where we talk about Nelson. He has been one of the most consistent Islanders over the last few years and has stepped up considerably in Barzal's absence. He already has 10 goals on the season and has been the most impactful Islanders forward at even strength. Contending teams are already circling around him at the moment and waiting for the moment he's made available again this season, after briefly hitting the trade market last year. Brock Nelson was in play, and he could have been moved if the team was not in the wildcard mix. The source told RG, he has value being a consistent 30-goal scorer. Nelson has a reasonable $6 million cap hit, and when the trade deadline approaches, it will be lower for the potential acquiring team. On top of that, the Islanders would also be able to retain up to 50% of his salary, bringing his base cap hit to $3 million, making him one of the most attractive pieces available. Contending teams are already eyeing him, especially if the team continues this way, said this source. Vancouver was a team that tried to acquire him last year, and I think they would take another shot at him this year. Currently, it is unclear what teams are interested in Nelson, but there is an expectation that he will draw interest from at least 4 or 5 clubs looking to upgrade down the middle. The source doesn't believe anything is imminent yet, but the Isles could execute a swift retool if executed correctly, as most of their top players are on the wrong side of 28. Whether or not Lamoriello will be the one to see it through, though, is another question entirely. So, let's talk about the idea of Brock Nelson heading over to Vancouver. Ultimately, if you were to acquire a player like Nelson to the Canucks in, let's just say, a third-line center role. Let's just throw that out there, right? I mean, he's not going to dethrone Miller, he's not going to dethrone Pettersson. If you give Brock Nelson, let's say, 15 to 17 minutes, I ultimately do think that his point production goes down. I don't think that he sustains the same level of points that he has had recently in Vancouver, but he's already been accustomed to playing top 6 minutes the past few years. This would almost be like another Elias Lindholm situation, except Brock Nelson is a lot bigger. He also is not a right-handed center, so there is a conversation you need to have about that as to whether or not his handedness would hold him back from being a super valuable piece for Vancouver, because as we had talked about last season, it was already a big deal, the fact that Elias Lindholm was a righty, because you would have Petey, Miller, both lefties. You'd have yourself your fourth-line guy, Teddy Bluger or Pius Suter, they're both lefties as well, and ultimately you would need some diversification when it comes to winning draws either on the right or the left with a stronger side right-handed guy, should you be presented with that opportunity. The diversity was pretty valuable there. In fact, the Vancouver Canucks only have 3 forwards on the team who are right-handed in general. Besser, Garland, and Sherwood. Everybody else is a lefty, so maybe there's an opportunity to open the door for a righty if they were to so choose. But still, this roster has the same problem it had last year. It's just Elias Lindholm was a very big X-factor to challenge that. Whether or not Brock Nelson's size and his reliability as a solid all-around hockey player is strong enough to overcome that idea remains to be seen. But ultimately, I do think that he's a guy that would stabilize the Canucks center core. It's just whether or not you really need that, that's another question. I mean, thinking about what the ideal lines for Vancouver would look like, with Miller and Petey as the 1-2, if you have Miller with Besser and I guess Pius Suter, you have Pettersson with, let's just say, Garland and DeBrusk, you have yourselves Sherwood with Dakota Joshua and I guess Teddy Bluger, and then you have maybe yourselves Danton Heinen on the 4th line or an Atiu Ratu. You run into some of the same ideas from last year. You'd have a Teddy Bluger playing on the 4th line, which whether or not that's really worth it for him remains to be seen. If you replaced Atiu Ratu with a guy like Brock Nelson, of course the team's getting better. It's just, is that the best improvement you could make? Would you rather go out there and acquire a defenseman instead, for example? Brock Nelson ultimately is a good player, but there are enough surplus things with the Vancouver Canucks that I could understand why they might not want to do this sort of a move. Maybe last year, like this source goes out there and says it was more easy for Vancouver to tie themselves in with that conversation because they were in the market for a center. They got Elias Lindholm, though. So now, things may be different. Who really knows? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the idea of trading for Brock Nelson. Do you think there are any other Islanders centers that you could see the Canucks targeting instead? They already got Atiu Ratu, and they sent away Bo Horvat. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this entire trade conversation. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.